Welcome to the future of space. Today we have Aaron Burnett with us. He is a co founder and CEO of Space Ventures. Aaron and his team are building the first public space investment portal. Some weeks ago, they threw a big space event with Type 1 Venture, I believe. He's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in LA. It was amazing to be back in real life with a bunch of space people. Aaron, welcome to the future space.
Daniel, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share the story and get people excited about investing in space.
Absolutely. Let's get going and first start with your three words to describe space for you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think for me, I think of it as inspiring, limitless opportunity. That's kind of the things that initially pop in my head.
You should create a little T-shirt, space, inspiring limitless opportunities.
There you go. Right? That's good. Now I'm going to have to pay you for the for the copyright to that one.
trademark, trademark, Aaron.
Exactly.
Um, Aaron, there's always a lot of talks about going to space. The people who see the vision for us, it's obvious. For a lot of people, they believe it's at a competition beyond the technology and the science of going to space. What is for you the human story of this journey?
Yeah, this comes up a lot, right? Like why space? And you've seen some people kind of attack the idea of, space as a waste of resources, a waste of time potentially. For me, I think, obviously there's technology and things like that, but you can go back, I think you go back and just look at all the things that have happened that are generally positive from, space exploration and things like that. Just understanding more about the universe, you know, where and what is going on around us, right? And instead of just kind of being inwardly focused, I think what it does is it has the nature of uniting people. There you'll see that a lot with people that come back. Even just seeing the overview effect, like just seeing the curvature of the Earth from a fairly high vantage point, or just over the Kármán line. William Shatner and Michael Strahan, they come back crying, right? And a lot of people have that kind of emotional response because essentially I think it helps to really unite humanity and realize all of our little issues are really small when you like turn back and look at it's us versus the void. Even if there is nothing else out there as far as intelligent life, which seems like a crazy thing to say, but even if there is nothing out there, it's still us versus the void. So I think there's a lot of reasons to pursue space, even if it just means kind of this natural unification that can happen from conquering a seemingly impossible obstacle together.
I mean, if the idea was never to leave, like children would never leave the house either. Like families would just be piling on top of each other over and over generations. At one point, you want your children to kind of like go and create their own. It's not that you're abandoning your family. It's just that life in the family unit expands, and it's not just the human species, it's every species. Whether it's a pack of wolf, at one point the pack becomes too big, and they need to seek out new ventures to create their new population. It's just that now we're at the we've spent our time, life has evolved to a certain degree on the planet where it has a capacity to become multiplanetary. And from the perspective of life, it's always been kind of looking for that time where you can come from, it went from single cell to multi-cell, and then life changed dramatically. Now it's going from single planet to multiplanetary, and we're going to see this quantum leap in evolution. So
Yeah, life explores, life moves and expands kind of ever outward. So like I was mentioning, let's assume that we're the only ones in the universe, which seems kind of unlikely. Maybe we just don't have what's required to really understand that, or who knows, there's all sorts of theories out there. But with that assumption, even it's just natural to see that expand outward. And you don't really want to use examples of, the new world, exploring the new world or moving west, because really life was already there. And then that was more of a conquest of things. But, we do use those examples. We do use the moving west example in space when we talk about economy, because that is, the industry that was in the east moved west, just kind of like train stop by train stop, right? And so it does help. But yeah, I think when you're talking about moving out, I think that's kind of a natural drive that life has, is just to move out and explore and propagate life further out into the cosmos.
So remember when William Shatner, in the beginning, when the whole billionaire narrative went out, there were two moments that really shifted the dynamic. There was inspiration for with Jared, which for me was an absolutely well executed story. I mean, for all the right reasons, the way that he chose the team and what he decided to do for St. Jude Hospital, like it was just perfect in many ways. And then William Shatner going up, this person, this artist who's trained to capture the emotion of the moment, and he comes down and you can see that like Jeff is not in the same space. Like he's trying to, you know, connect with the people that are having a party over there, and William is like, dude, you have no idea. It's just like, and he's like trying to capture, and it's like death and life, and that for me is like this is the experience that a lot more people are going to experience as you
Yep.
get to see the planet in perspective and context with the universe and the scarcity. Now,
Yep.
is life fragile? It is resilient, but the scarcity aspect and the fact that it exists on this little bubble is definitely going to be an experience for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Aaron,
let,
tell me
let me
about.
just add a little bit of a note there when we talk about scarcity, and because this, I think this always blows my mind. When you talk about elite groups of people, everyone thinks billionaires. But what's crazy is that there's, at last I Googled, it was something like 2,000 plus billionaires, and there's substantially less people that have seen space from that vantage point. You're talking like 600, right? I think I forget what the last number was. It's around that number. So, from a elite group perspective, astronauts, or people flying above the Kármán line and looking back at Earth from that vantage point is far more of an elite group. And so opening those doors up, we don't even really know. I think a lot of us assume that there's a unification that'll happen. We don't really even know. I would assume that there's a lot of that, given just the kind of responses you've seen, people that have done that, that have been able to see that vantage point. But I would like to believe that maybe it's just my optimism, but the more people that see that, the more this mentality of, you know, it's not us versus them, it is us globally versus, if you want to say versus, the void or whatever else is out there, right? So, yeah, I think it always blows my mind to think of that.
Now, you co-founded and you're the CEO of Space Ventures. Can you share with the audience your journey from where you are today and coming from high school and college? What happened in between the two that led you to
Yeah.
where you are?
So, my story is like in the aerospace industry, definitely non-traditional. Um, but when I was, so it'll back up a little bit and then zip forward really quickly here. But as a kid, I think a lot of us have this idea that space is cool. I'd love to be an astronaut. Fairly pragmatic individual. So as I was growing up, it became quite obvious that wasn't necessarily something I could go to school for. I could, but that wasn't necessarily me. I wasn't the fighter pilot type. I probably wasn't the PhD type. So maybe I'll do something else, and that's too futuristic anyway. That's not for me. But then I had the experience of seeing, the Falcon Heavy, that first takeoff of the Tesla, and the very iconic boosters kind of landing side by side. And what it did is it kind of broke my brain, because I had two compartments in my head. One was like science fiction, which is something I'd always been interested in, loved digesting. I grew up watching Stargate SG-1. I think that was just like one of the popular shows when I was a kid, or I was seeing reruns. I don't even know at that point. But anything like that really got me excited and engaged, and I wanted to see that future. And so that was one side of my brain. The other side was like everyday life, work, is boring, and this stuff is for escapism and it's not for reality. And then I saw these boosters landing side by side, and that was clearly science fiction. Like, how could my brain justify what was something I would normally see in a science fiction TV show, but this is real life? And so what it did was it kind of forced me into a moment of, reckoning that said, I have to be a part of this. Like, there's got to be a way that I can be a part of this, because we're much closer than I originally thought we were, as far as, living in that, I don't know, expanse sort of life, if you like that show or something like that. Like, we're much closer than we think we are. And so I wanted to help accelerate that even faster. And that drove me towards just trying to figure out as much as I could about space. Started with things like Everyday Astronaut, which is just, videos on YouTube and learning about rockets, which are cool. Then moving into things like, it was kind of natural for me because I come with a finance and marketing degree. So looking at investment capital and things like that, I started looking at space capital reports around, private investment in aerospace. It was very interesting to me to see some of the trends and see that it was growing. But then also to kind of understand, by looking at some of the data and then also talking to founders, where some of the gaps were and what we could where we could potentially help. And then also, you kind of pull from whatever experiences you have, because in this aerospace industry, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an aerospace engineer, I'm not a billionaire that can fund my own rocket. So I kind of have a limited pool of skill sets to be able to use plug and play in the aerospace industry. So I pulled from two key ones. One is community building, and then the other was kind of an investing background I had. I've had a brokerage account since I was 12. My mom opened it for me. Bad timing because it was like right around the 2001 bubble, but I learned a lot. And so I'd always had interest in investing and learning about alternative investments and things like that. So seeing all this, pulling from all those experiences, seeing what I could add value and seeing where the problem was and where maybe I could help to fix it, it did kind of help. And I think that's kind of a natural story you hear for a lot of people that come from maybe a more non-traditional background. They didn't come from a PhD program or an aerospace engineering program or pilot, sort of program. They've come from, non-traditional. You just find what you can add value to, find where there's problems, see how you can fix them, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think you and I, we belong to that second wave of space interest. Um, and like you, like that day that I saw the two rockets landing upright, which, your brain doesn't really process it correctly, because like this is almost like playing something on rewind because it's not supposed to happen. But for me, before that, everything that I was writing, and because of what I do with the solo wilderness expeditions and talking about nature, it was always, we're limited to this planet, and therefore we're gonna have to figure out how to humble ourselves and slow down. But that moment, for me, it was my big aha moment when I realized that life actually was never meant to stay on Earth. It was always, I mean, life has been, the planet has been looking forward for this day 4.6 billion years later, where now a species has a capacity to make it a multiplanetary for the same reason that it went from single cell to multi-cell. So life, if life was not interested in that sense of connection and growth, there will be no point of starting from the beginning. There's the entire purpose of life is to connect the dots, and there are other dots in the universe, and so these dots are trying to figure out how to connect. And now, we're entering this era where we have the capacity, and I think that's the success of the human species, is that we've been able to manage and overcome the unpredictability and the chaos of nature, because nature is quite chaotic, but we've been able to rise above it and use it at our own advantage by through creating a certain stability so that we can build on it, as opposed to being kind of nomad and be at the mercy of everything that happens. And now we're going to space.
And one thing that you meant that I'll add to this, I think it's important because for me, I find this is incredibly important driver of what we do in our team, and why my founder and I get up every morning is finding meaning in life. And this, comes back a little bit to my backstory where, when I was watching that rocket take, or the Falcon Heavy boosters, it was on a live stream. I was in Ecuador at the time, and I'd spent 5 years in South America. I think that might have been year 3 or 4, something like that. Because I went down there because I had a quarter life crisis where I said, I'm doing all this marketing stuff, and I could kind of project where my life or career life was headed. And I said, there's got to be more than this. And so I was really on a search for meaning in a way, and some kind of pilgrimage or whatever you could say. But I was doing volunteer work and I was teaching. These are things you do to give back or add value to humanity as a whole. But there's still something missing. And then when I saw this, and as I worked on being a part of the industry and making it move forward and accelerating, I'll tell you that the difference in being able to ramp up the number of hours I work and all that other stuff, it makes the world of difference when you have that level. You feel like you're adding meaning to things. And so, what used to be maybe hard to wake up on a Monday, now I'm looking forward to Monday morning, right? Not that I really have a true Monday morning, kind of working the whole time, but
Yes.
I'm kind of looking forward to that mindset of getting the week started, and excited for the day-to-day work, even the minutia. Like, I hate contracts and legal work, and that's part of what you have to do sometimes. The founder signs stuff and reads stuff, and that's about the most boring thing you can do, at least for me. But I can power through that and get it done because I can see that what we're doing has meaning and has impact. And really what we're trying to do is drive humanity forward, in a way, increase innovation to a point where humanity is like it's obvious that we're going to have 1 million people
Yeah.
off planet living and working and that kind of thing. So I think it's really important when you think about meaning and the intrinsic motivation that individuals have, because if you're intrinsically motivated to make money, normally, at least for someone like myself, that only lasts for a couple of weeks, and then what can I have with more meaning? And that's what we always look for, members of our team that are intrinsically motivated to kind of achieve this big mission. And unfortunately, these missions and things we've had in normal business, you kind of have to figure out a way to manufacture a way you're changing humanity with your, not to pick on this, but I come from marketing world. So another B2B marketing SaaS company, right? How do you figure out a way that you're changing the world for the better, right? You
Yeah.
kind of have to figure this out. And I'm sure some of the founders believe that, but it's also like, it never felt genuine to me. Whereas now it feels like what we're doing actually has real meaning. And so it's a whole different thing. So if you can find that meaning, I, encourage people to grasp and hold on to it.
And for the people who are not in the space industry, I mean, one thing that we can tell them is the story is a lot different. I mean, I come from the outdoor, the environmentalist, the conservationist. I mean, and the story that we've been telling the world for the past 25 years is that the human species is a cancer on the planet, or a bad species. How bad, how awful could we be? And just kind of like that kind of guilt over our head, like over. And I don't have any children, but I've worked with children. And when you keep telling your children or people that they're bad, well, guess what? They're going to turn out, it's not really inspiring. You get caught up into, obviously, getting up and doing the work because you have to pay the bill, but there's where you want to go, there's no motivation and inspiration. But as soon as I started to get into the space community, there was just this sense of like, we can do this, we will, not at the expense of what needs to be changed, but for the benefit of everything. It's like this breath of fresh air, where everybody is kind of like in it together for the right reasons.
Yeah, and I think there's something you bring up that's important is we've been inundated with a lot of negativity in general, so kind of the environmental community, but in general, it's been there's like Stanford prison experiment. Like, humans are a shower and a meal away from being essentially crazy and maybe killing each other and all this stuff. But there's new research coming out, and it's really meta-analysis. And there's a book that I read that really helped to kind of frame my mind on this, called Humankind. I'm not sure you're familiar with it. The author's last name, I believe, is Bergman. Maybe you can link to it,
Yeah, I'll link,
um,
link in.
in the Yeah, but it's a relatively recent book, and really it kind of studies all these studies and just kind of tears apart the ones that are all about humans are negative. Generally speaking, ultimately, the way humans were successful was by being social creatures, and by definition, the way you work socially well together is by kind of doing what we perceive to be morally good.
Yeah.
That's why, you like someone who's down to earth, even though we kind of, make idols of people that are like kind of crazy and full of themselves and egotistical. And there are people that are quite egotistical in high places. We do vibe with and enjoy working with people that are down to earth like us. And those are the sort of things that we kind of feel are moral. But a lot of that has to come back to, you know, humans are inherently good. And if you believe that versus humans are inherently evil, it changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a lot of that, humans, we're not perfect, but in this aerospace industry, we understand we can make the world a better place. And the industry is doing a lot of cool things to get, satellites look back at Earth to monitor all sorts of things, like whether it's illegal fishing or it's, environmental, catastrophes that are happening or stopping wildfires. All this kind of stuff is, happening, and people are working on that. And it kind of goes under the radar because they just see a steam of what is actually like mainly water vapor coming out of the back of the rocket, but they assume that that means it's all, another, several tons of CO2 being put into the atmosphere. But with that in mind, I think there is a lot of value and meaning to the idea that humans are, inherently, if you really look at it, good. And then what I tell everybody is, if you really want to, be more optimistic about the future, you do two things. You need to probably consume half the news,
Yeah.
what we call news, news media. I'm not talking about different types of media or mainstream or whatever. I'm just saying news in general, because by definition, news is exceptional, and that means it's the exception to the rule. So the stuff that actually happens normally is kind of boring, and if you read it, it would be like, oh, we're fine. So it's kind of boring to us, so that doesn't get into the headlines. And then number two thing to do is talk to 10 space companies, space startups, because the things they're working on just will
Yeah.
blow your mind, because it's like, wow, I mean, that's what we're doing. And that can open up a whole new world for X, Y, or Z. Sometimes it's just cool. There's a lot of things. It just gets you really excited about the next 5, 10, 15 years instead of worrying about, everything negative that's happening. And there are some really, truly negative things happening, of course, but it helps put things into perspective.
I mean, there are issues in the world, but the reason why we're about to be 8 billion is because there's a lot more good than bad. Life doesn't move forward if it's constantly kind of cutting, shooting itself in the foot. A hammer. You will hear about the accident of the person who did something crazy with a hammer, but you don't hear about the millions of workers who build houses with it. And we've lost. It's getting harder and harder to filter, and make some sense when it demands such an effort actually to develop a constructive and positive image of. And even, even when you get Salesforce who gets into the blaming, or even um, leaders of our society that start putting space at the expense, it just contribute to this narrative of dividing as opposed to unifying. And then the other thing I think it's important for people to understand: life is not meant to be perfect, because where does it go if it's perfection? There's no growth, there's no evolution, and this constant disruption is what, making sure that we learn. And growth is a challenging process. And we understand the failure of individuals when it comes to creating innovation or creating a business, but the necessity of failure also exists within the personal development and cultural development. As a society, we need to feel these boundaries to reassess how we want to move forward and what we prioritize. And it's a complicated process, but we just need to give ourselves the tools to negotiate with it, as opposed to do the blaming and guilt the game, and say that we're constantly an awful species. But
Yeah. It bears repeating the, news by definition is only news if it's exceptional. right? It's only interesting if it's exceptional. And so we're not blaming news or what have you, but the focusing on the exception, the edge case of an edge case of an edge case, it really does drive you towards a certain kind of perspective, and it's important to take a step back and look at the full sample size of what's going on, right? Yes, you could focus on any one individual thing and you can make a case for all sorts of things, perfect utopia as well as, the world's ending. So, but if you take a step back and look, I think generally speaking, the trajectory of humanity is net positive. We are doing things that probably shouldn't do around environment and things like that. And I think that's generally a learning curve. But you have a lot of people who have heard that story, which is one of the good reasons for, perpetuating kind of the negative stuff is you hear that story and there's a lot of people tackling that, whether it's in the aerospace industry or outside. You see a lot of investment in clean tech and things like that that will change the world. I'm one of those people that is genuinely quite positive that we'll address it, within time, kind of thing. Not that I don't care about it, but we are working on it and we'll fix it. That's kind of my thought process.
Yeah, same here. Now let's circle back to space ventures. Most of the investment is usually through a venture capitalist, big investment firms. But what you brought to the table is really something that is more accessible to the public. It's a platform where the any person can go and participate and invest. Um, Tell us the how, because you're a co-founder. The other founder is Jay Brandt. How did that synergy get to be created, and then how did the investment platform get to be built?
Yeah. So, my co-founder, which is kind of funny. So I'm coming from more of like mid-career, transition into aerospace, utilizing passions and experiences that I have. And Brant, my co-founder, is coming from, later career, I should say, and transitioning into aerospace. But he's got a funny, kind of an interesting story where he actually applied to being a Canadian astronaut back in the day and still has his rejection letter from the agency. Spent 30 years on Wall Street doing all of that stuff and, a good career and all that, but learning a lot about investments and things like that. And then he came back in and kind of full circle moment, he was recently made a Canadian space ambassador, which was kind of cool. So like, he didn't get to be the astronaut, the way he had anticipated. But he was able to kind of make that transition. So anyway, it was kind of natural that two people like us would come together, right? Because we're both trying to be involved in this, different times of our lives, but, similar passions and interests. And so, when we're tackling what we're trying to tackle, it all comes back to, you kind of have to solve a problem. If you have a really cool widget and it doesn't solve a problem, no one's going to use it. And so it was always part of my thought process and our thought process talking to founders, how can we help you? And I learned very early on that there was a pattern with what they were saying. And it was the founders, I think probably the first five, I recognized the pattern, but that continued into 50 and beyond. The pattern was, I have a cool product. It's not ready for commercialization, or it's almost ready but needs to be in space, kind of thing. Um, and but I need about 1 to 5 million. It always range somewhere in there. Cheaper projects were 1, more expensive were 5, and I need to get into space to be ready to really start taking the contracts. No one's going to sign a contract that there's something to buy, right? And so that was a consistent problem, and the venture capital world wasn't taking that risk very often. Vast majority of cases, they weren't writing those checks, and it makes sense because you're talking about, and if one person's writing $1 million check, even if it's a venture group that has lots of LPs involved and partners that are giving them money to invest, if he or she writes that check and you fail, that's the end of their business potential, right? So that's a high risk, high risk. That could be wasted 3 years of their life, right? So it's a high risk, even if it's someone using someone else's money. Whereas, like what we were really targeting is how do we reduce the risk, across many people and still aggregate up to large quantities that are required to, operate in space. And that's where we realized if we can bring the public involved and reduce average check size down to as low as $100, any individual person can risk $100 individually. Well, it really shouldn't put you in jeopardy of not being able to make rent next month, that kind of thing. But um, aggregated together, that's very meaningful for the business itself. And then, utilizing equity, some of the newer equity regulations, you can actually get a piece of ownership as a result. So, we realized that there was a great opportunity to marry two problems. One was the founder side, which is a very strong and important piece of the puzzle. And the other is just this general lack of access to space, not just physical access, which, there are companies working on improving, but also the access to opportunities and investing and things like that. And so it became quite obvious that there was an opportunity at the earliest stages. What we're finding is later and later stage companies are interested in having the public join them, because there's a lot of value in large crowds of investors coming in, being a part of your business, even if that's before technically going the normal way of going public, like an IPO on the stock exchange, right?
So how many companies right now are funded through space ventures?
Yeah, so right now we have four companies live on the platform right now, that have been funded through their kind of minimum goals that they try and hit, all four of them. So it's kind of cool. We're about 100% success rate so far. And then what we're starting to see as well is, quite a few more that are in the hopper. So one of the things we're doing is, this process of taking the company public takes time. And you have to work with founders to do disclosures and things like that. And that process is important to making sure that the public isn't being taken advantage of and things like that. So we're taking those companies through that process. But we have another, let's say, roughly about six or so that want to be going out in the next 2 to 3 months. So we're very busy trying to get many more opportunities to the public. But yeah, that's essentially what we're looking at here. Right now for upwards of 10 or so over the next 2 to 3 months.
Now you had kind of a new event that happened. You had a live event where the founder of the company kind of pitched to the public, and then there was I remember I was looking at the founder explaining the company, and above was just the number of money raised, and you had a really great design associated with it. How did the event go, and how did the founder felt about the experience?
Yeah, so I mean, the event went better than we anticipated, I would say. Because you just assume the first of anything is going to be rough. So, but that first event went really well. Production quality went really well. The founder was really happy with the results. Being able to essentially talk to the public, answer questions from the public, and really, it's a step towards community. And so, really, the service that we're providing there, technically for the founder, is really nothing more than another communication channel to communicate with investors, right? So you can have threads of, text, right? That's one way to communicate with people, but you can also communicate via live stream. And so it's really what we wanted to provide that service to our founders, because as we were talking to investors, we heard over and over and over again, access to founders was important to them. And so you can't give necessarily one-on-ones for 200 or 500 people to a founder. They'd be on nonstop phone calls all day. So we've had to say, okay, how can we make this work in kind of a scaled approach? And so that's where we gave the ability for what is pretty standard kind of YouTube style live stream, with it, a live chat function you can ask while the founder's giving their pitch, and they can answer Q&A and things like that. So we're really excited about that. And then it's even cooler when you have, a real-time investment bar at the top where you can see investments coming in, and as they come in, that bar kind of ticks up. Very cool, kind of fun experience. So it's a first of many. What we're trying to do is encourage founders to give kind of fun access as well. So the next one looks like will be something closer to, like a, manufacturing floor kind of tour, maybe a test of some kind. Those are the types of things that I think the space geeks among us really enjoy.
Now, right now, you're focusing on startups. Is there a vision of tomorrow where an established company also chooses to go through space venture to create a specific fund that involves the public, as opposed to kind of create that connection with the public and the company?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I was referencing this a little earlier, so I'll take a chance to dive a little bit deeper. So, yes, so when a company is public, like on the New York Stock Exchange or something, there's no going back and using our platform for that kind of public offering. What we do is really provide private companies the ability to have public investors. So, luckily for us, that means the vast majority of new space companies are private. They're still private. Normally, that means the public cannot invest. But with a platform like ours, that means that they have access to that group. And one of the services we provide for founders is by narrowly focusing our investment niche, we're able to bring people who are very interested in this type of opportunity, who may be a part of the industry, who have technical knowledge, who are interested in investing in these kind of things, and are generally 10-year type of investors, right? Thinking about the long haul, not thinking about quarter to quarter results and jumping in and out. By giving that access, yes, we're seeing a lot of companies that are a little bit further down the pike. They're still a private company, but they're further down the pipe than, let's say, a company taking the first check ever from investors. So we have a mix. Some of them are much earlier stages, some of them are later stages. We have different securities that line up based on where you are in your funnel or your life cycle as a founder in a company. But yeah, there's fairly ubiquitous interest in the idea of bringing the public in and getting them involved.
Nice. So if people right now are interested of going and getting involved in investing, they go to the website spacedventures.com, correct?
That is correct. It's space with a D, ventures.com,
And
all
then
one
they
word.
registered, and it costs nothing to register, and then they get through this process that is really
Yep.
well designed. I don't know if you did the design yourself, but it's
Yep.
really well done.
Yeah, our team is really good at trying to set up what we think are really nice, seamless UX, UI, and kind of a great experience product. It's kind of the subtext of everything we do, really high quality, because we're kind of annoyed when some of the worst websites out there are aerospace companies. So we're trying to really, up the bar for space industry and really take it public in a way that's, represents the industry well. So yes, you sign up. It's the cost is free to investors, so there is no cost to individual investors unless they want to pay with a credit card. So that provides that functionality, but the founders can't really cover that cost, and we
Yeah.
can't cover that cost. Those fees start to add up when you're talking about hundreds of dollars at a time. But the founders essentially pay the fee, and we have a fee that we operate in the middle. We do all this sort of work with the founders, setting up their deals and going through the legal process and stuff like that. So yeah, and that comes out of their end at the end.
Yeah, I love. I mean, I've truly have enjoyed the process of the platform and the design. And I come from a design background, so the aesthetic of it and the dynamic of it, you get definitely a big thumbs up. And it's so refreshing to see the democratization of investment into space that now not just revolves around the VC, but also to the public, so it can participate in building that human story that I think everybody is working at. So a big congratulations, Aaron, to you, Brent, and the team for an amazing work.
Thank you very much, and I'll definitely be sharing that with the team as well. They love to hear that, their work is appreciated. Sometimes all those forms and all that crazy stuff that we have to do to fulfill regulations, they take a lot of work to get right, and so sometimes that goes unnoticed. So I'll make sure that they hear that you give them a thumbs up.
Excellent. We'll put all the links in the comments or in the post to Space Ventures and some of some of the items that we talked about. I'll put your LinkedIn profile if people want to reach out to you. Aaron, thank you so much. Glad that we finally got to connect, and I'm looking forward to meet up in real life on the road this year.
Thank you for having me. It's just fun conversation, and maybe I'll come. Maybe we can come back and talk more in a few months or
Absolutely
something
looking
like that.
forward, Aaron. All right, bye bye.